Today on The Real Story, a one-on-one with Governor Ned Lamont, his priorities now that his second term is secure, from his proposed largest income tax cut in Connecticut's history to navigating an uncertain economy, an in-depth discussion on where he hopes to steer Connecticut. Plus, we'll talk with him about other important topics like childcare costs and calls for a pause on all of Connecticut's prisoner commutations. Plus, joining us to continue the conversation of Connecticut's economic health is the new commissioner of the Department of Economic and Community Development, Alexandra Dong. What's the strategy around attracting businesses, and does Connecticut have a perception problem? It's all today on The Real Story. Good morning, and thanks for joining us on The Real Story. I'm Jenn Bernstein. With a clean win in November, Governor Ned Lamont has started off his second term in office with some momentum. First of all, after more than 2 years, COVID is in a very different place from the unprecedented crisis the governor had to navigate starting in 2020. And the state's finances are also in a very different place from when he first took office, with a robust surplus and a full rainy day fund. So Governor Lamont kicked off the legislative session with his budget proposal, which includes one of the largest income tax cuts in Connecticut history. It would benefit the middle class, 1.1 million taxpayers out of the 1.7 million taxpaying households in the state. Of course, nothing is without its controversy, though, and there are a lot of opinions about what to do with this balloon of taxpayer dollars that we're holding, and who should shoulder the responsibility of something like a large-scale income tax cut. So without further ado, we want to get into it right now with Connecticut's Governor Ned Lamont. Good morning, and thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Jen. Nice to be back.
Good. All right. So your first term, you spent a lot of it in crisis management mode with COVID, right? So what's your mentality as you head into this new term?
That we got to build on some very positive momentum. You know, we came into office, 4 years ago plus, looking at $2 billion annual deficits as far as the eye could see, beginning to turn that ship around, get some companies back in the state, population, then hit by COVID, hit hard. Remember, it was New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Mm-hmm. I think we managed through that, working together as one pretty well. And so here we are 4 years later. We've got a solid budget, as you announced. I think we can afford a permanent real tax cut for the middle class. We haven't seen that in this state in generations.
When you look at this budget surplus we have and the rainy day fund, and there's a lot of opinions, right, on what to do with it. So when you're looking at it, what's a priority? What do you look at and say this needs to get done immediately?
Well, first of all, I'm glad we got our rainy day fund intact. $3.5 billion. There could be some recessionary clouds out there in and around interest rates. So I think Connecticut is very well positioned. I just soon be Connecticut as any of the other 49 states.
Let's talk about your tax cut proposals. So you proposed more than $500 million in annual tax relief with this what would be the largest income tax cut in Connecticut's history if it went through. Your administration saying again that the middle class would benefit from this. How did you go in that direction with the income tax? What led you there? And is it sustainable?
I don't want to do anything that's not sustainable. We have a long history in this state of boom and bust, and revenues are really strong, crisis. So we've had soon to be five balanced budgets in a row. So I've looked at this very carefully. The middle class has gotten slammed in this country over the last generation or so, especially with inflation over the last year or so. We're slowly coming out of that. Let's give people a break. This is going to be a savings of about $50 a month to the average working family, up to about $150,000 a year.
I was reading analysis from your budget director in one of Chris Keating with the Hartford Courant's articles, and he was saying that the bulk of your income tax receipts are from the wealthy. You've been pretty clear throughout when you were running and even now that you're hesitant to tax the wealthy. Analysis from the group A Better Connecticut Institute said that Connecticut's richest taxpayers decide where to live mostly on quality of life, proximity to family and their businesses, and not necessarily on something like the state income tax. So, given that you lived in Greenwich, which is the town that gives the most revenue with the income tax, what's your opinion to that study? You've seen it firsthand. I know you've talked about people leaving because
I think
of
it's a
those
little bit of
factors.
wishful thinking. There's no question. There's a whole variety of reasons people move, to be closer to family. Often it's work-related. But it's not a total surprise that New York and California, that have the two highest income tax rates in the country, are dramatically losing population, especially upper-income folks. And Texas and Florida, which have zero income tax, are gaining the most population. That's not true in Connecticut. We've held the line. We have not raised taxes. We're helping out the middle class. And we've had actually a number of people moving into the state over the last few years. And that's a really good thing. Young people, not old guys like me. That's what we need.
Young people. Let's talk about the bank collapses. I was listening to a Bloomberg radio interview that you had given, and they were asking you about how you felt about, the state of our banks here in Connecticut. And at the time, you felt like that they were secure. The feds have announced that they've just raised interest rates again. I'm curious if you still feel that way a week later.
I do. Our banks in Connecticut are solid. I've talked to all the leaders. They have a diversified group of depositors, unlike, say, the Silicon Valley Bank, which was much narrower. They've husbanded their cash well. But I do worry. I think our banks are going to be a lot more cautious about lending. At the same time, the Fed is raising interest rates. I got to always prepare for the worst, and I worry there might be a recession around the corner.
Yeah, that leads into my next question here, because we do have higher costs. We have inflation. People are absolutely feeling it here in our state. I mean, my grocery bill, I think, has doubled when I'm going and shopping right now. What are you specifically watching, and is there any way to hedge that off? And what specifically do you think when you're up at night? What about our economy keeps you up at night?
I'll tell you
what
I feel good about our economy is the fact that we have a big manufacturing base. A lot of that is defense related. A lot of that will be growing over the next 10 to 15 years, given the threat you see from Russia and China.
Yeah, and the August Defense
From an
Alliance.
economy point of view, that's very solid. I'm encouraged the fact that we have still, 90, 100,000 jobs that are unfilled. So even if we have this recession, I don't think it's going to be a heavy unemployment recession, but we always got to be careful.
I want to talk to you about childcare costs, because this is a big one, and I know you all just put out something about it. As a mom with young kids, I see what people go through out there. The cost of childcare, astronomical for working parents. Issue of pre-K hours and access, and the weight that it puts on working parents, and especially working moms. We saw that with COVID as well, women leaving the workforce, and there's the data and statistics to support that. You recently tried to address this with an executive order. Explain that to us.
We're having the biggest expansion of daycare in the history of the state. And our particular need is for infant and toddlers right now. That's where there's a real shortage. I do it because, A, I want to give these kids the very best head start in life. Every teacher I talk to reminds me that, look, I can tell a kid that came from a really quality childcare. It makes a difference in pre-K and kindergarten, what a difference that makes. As I said before, we have a lot of jobs that are going unfilled. So that's in part about training, but it's also about making mom and dad, making it easier for them to get back to work. And daycare makes it easier for them to get back to work.
Why an executive order? Does that just get it done more quickly?
We did executive order during COVID, but now we've got a bill in front of the legislature to continue our expansion of daycare, childcare.
And I mean, there's been pushback using the executive order. What's your response to people who feel like that's not the best way to do it?
That's why I've got it right in front of the legislature, a full, complete bill. Beth Bai does amazing work. Office of Early Childhood, talking to all the legislators, saying why it's so important for us to double down on our commitment to child care.
Okay, and this just came on our radar, last week. I want to make sure I ask you about this. A form of the TCI bill is in the environmental committee right now. Republicans kind of ringing the alarm bell, saying that it's bringing back the gas tax. And we know, obviously, we suspended the gas tax here in Connecticut. You kind of led that effort to give people relief. Do you support something like the TCI bill being brought back?
I have no idea what they're talking about. We were one of the first states in the country to have a gas tax cut, given the high price of gasoline going back a year or so ago. We do have some environmental bills. What we care a lot about is all the trash. Right now, most of that is being shipped out of state, trying to do a better job of recycling that so we can turn that into everything from feed for animals if it's food waste, and to recycle more of the plastics, in particular the aluminum. That's what we're trying to do.
It's such a hard balance, right? How do you look at being environmentally friendly in cost? It's a tough place to be, right?
It's tough, but it was tougher before. I mean, today I'm finding that the renewables are competitive. You know, maybe not with coal, but with oil and gas. Look what's happened to oil and gas over the last year or two. There's high prices there. We've made a big commitment to nuclear at 5 cents a kilowatt hour, making good money on that. That's carbon-free power. You know, our waste stream, getting the trash so we don't have to pay a fortune to ship it all out of state. It's going to save us money over time. Right now, it's a little pricey.
All right, let's talk about commutations. This is something that I've covered extensively here. There's been calls from Republican lawmakers to pause commutations in light of the fact that the Board of Partisan Paroles had written down a commutation policy. And in 2022, there were more than 70 people that had their sentences commuted compared to years before, where there was only 1 or 2. Where do you stand on this issue currently?
So it's an independent board set up by the legislature that makes determinations like this. And after a pause during COVID, they've done a lot more commutations. I don't want anybody to be confused, though. These are maybe young people, 18, 19, 20, who 25, 30 years ago committed a bad crime. Since then, they've been in a correctional facility. It's not the old-fashioned prison. They've done a lot of learning. They've done some things, maybe earning a chance to reduce their sentence by, say, 10 years or so. And it's not like they walk out the door. Then they go into a halfway house under strict supervision. But that said, if the legislature wants to take a look at it, let's take a look at it. So we're going to have all the stakeholders together around the table in about 2 weeks.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yep.
And what is that going to look like?
That's going to look like those in victims' rights. That's going to look like those in criminal justice, corrections. So we take a look at what we're trying to do, what the Board of Pardons and Commutations are all about. And if the legislature wants to make some changes, they can. But I don't think you want to go back to the days of lock them up and throw away the key. I think we've done a better job with criminal justice. Our crime rate is down, and I think we ought to keep going on a good progress.
There's been criticism on the board, formulating those policies. Senator John Kissel, during a hearing last week, said that he feels that if the board made those policies, they should have run it by the governor's office or members of the legislature. Do you agree with him on that?
They don't have to. It's an independent board. That's how it was set up. But I think it would have been a good thing to do. And that's why we're going to have this group come in and just take a second look, refresh. I
did an in-depth piece with the Carlson family, and their daughter Elizabeth Carlson was murdered by her ex-boyfriend in their family home 20 years ago. And her killer took a plea deal. So the family believed that he was going to be gone, and he was eligible to apply for commutation. Now, he made it to a pre-screen review, and they tossed him out, so he didn't make it further. But it was a big thing because the state law requires that the family get notified, and they had to send in letters, and they were worried about him possibly getting out. Do you think that something like a plea deal should be included in being eligible for commutation?
Well, as you pointed out, the vast majority of people who apply, either get a hearing or turn down, or don't even get a hearing at all. That said, a plea deal versus a long sentence, I think that's what the legislature can weigh in on. I think the Board of Pardons ought to have, some discretion there. But who's going to be at the table? The victims, because they have a right to be heard as well. So they'll be right there with us as we discuss this in the next couple of weeks.
Is there anything in the legislature, or that's not in the legislature right now, that you think needs attention, that you would like them to put forward?
Look, broadly, I want us to get more serious about crime. That starts with guns. We've got an aggressive bill out there, especially those illegal ghost guns, no serial number, walk right through TSA with them, incredibly dangerous. Some other reforms that are being considered out there. That's what I think we ought to do. Public safety has got to be priority one for me.
Let's talk about, just quickly, we have obviously Commissioner Dom coming on next. Where do you see our state in the next 5 years growing, and how do you keep businesses? I mean, you heard me say, does Connecticut have a perception problem, when we were just at the beginning of this show, and you turned to me and you said, we did have a perception problem. So can you just elaborate on that?
Yeah, I'm the warm-up band for Alexandra Dom. She'll be out here to tell you. But look, We had a hard time getting our fiscal house in order. We were sort of notorious that way. Like I said, we had 5 balanced budgets in a row. We've paid down billions of dollars of pension debt, and people are beginning to notice. We've had tens of thousands of new young families move into the state of Connecticut, and more new business startups in the last few years than we've had in the last 20 years. So I like the trend. I want to keep that momentum going. And Alexandra's done a great job. I mean, it's less about handing out cash now. It's about opportunity. It's about workforce and training and giving you some of the startup capital you may need to help start your own business.
All right, we only have about a minute left, and I wanted to do this with our guests moving forward, and you're going to be my guinea pig for this, which I'm sure you'll love. A little bit of a lightning round, okay, to end on a light note here. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and you just give whatever you think comes to mind. Ready? Favorite go-to stress food? When you're up at night, what do you snack on?
Chips.
Chips. Anything specific?
Well, I love Fritos.
Fritos. Okay, interesting. What's your pump-up song? We know you like music.
Black Eyed Peas.
Oh, okay. How would your kids describe you in 10 words or less?
Annoying. Thinks he knows everything. And also fun.
Okay. Last show you binged on? Not that you have a lot of time.
Ted Lasso.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. They were just at the White House. Salty or sweet snacks?
Salty.
Okay. That's going to do it.
That's it?
That's it. I only had a few. I don't know.
Okay.
Governor Ned Lamont, thank you so much for coming on The Real Story and answering our questions and having a little bit of fun here at the end. Very much appreciated. You're always welcome on the program.
Thank you.
All right, coming up on The Real Story, we are continuing our conversation about where Connecticut is headed with almost 100,000 job openings, or 90,000 according to the governor, and some corporate headquarters leaving at points. What does our state's economic future look like? How can Connecticut keep businesses and people? Connecticut's Commissioner of Economic and Community Development, Alexandra Dom, joins us.